we moved into the very large challenge of taking on large copper from exploration discovery through to production. Timeframes that might be considered as a real barrier to entry these days. An average of 20 or 21 years to bring large-scale copper projects through is exactly why we have a complete lack of new supply coming to the industry. And to put this into perspective, Hot Chili, after all of that time, developing this very large coastal copper-gold resource base and large-scale development on the Chilean coastline north of Santiago, this is one of 5 copper developers outside of the control of the majors, which is holding a plus 100,000 tonne per annum copper project. So projects that can produce in excess of $1 billion US revenue for long life. These are the type of projects that produce extreme leverage to rising commodity markets. And being a company that very much knows about persistence and patience and developing assets through cycles, we feel like we're sitting with the right project at the right level of advancement, very meaningful to catch this new oncoming copper cycle. And there's a saying in this industry that obviously when the tide goes out, you find out who's naked. But when the tide comes in, you also find out who has the largest exposure to that commodity price. And that has really been behind probably one of the most significant re-rates that has just begun in the stock, quadrupling in 8 months, tripling in 5 months since we gave our shareholders a rights issue at 60 cents, and continuing to rise off the back of a rising copper price. And that realisation that Hot Chili is holding something very rare. I'll firstly commence just with some of the key aspects of the company. We're listed on the ASX. We also have a growing register of North American investors, TSX-V dual listing. Glencore is our largest shareholder, well funded at the moment. An advanced copper asset that I said has meaningful scale, is both near term and going through feasibility at the moment. We have an embedded water asset which differentiates us. We are one of the lowest elevation of the large-scale copper developers in the world, and most importantly, an embedded water asset that looks to be able to potentially finance this project with no dilution to our shareholders because of a large amount of foresight by the company. Moving forward to really what is one of our first key differentiators, its location. We are located down on the Chilean coastline, 600 kilometres north of Santiago, in what is one of the largest clusters of undeveloped major copper projects in the world, in a country that is Tier 1 jurisdiction for mining in Chile, and which produces around 25% of the world's copper. You can see in the bottom right where a lot of our very large peer projects controlled by majors and companies like Filo or Lundin and BHP now in the Vicuña. Those projects are largely stranded at above 4,000 metres, and elevation is everything in large copper. It is what has led to a lot of these copper projects having large challenges on capital costs and operating costs. Those are the challenges which we simply do not face down at 700 metres on the Pan American Highway next to existing infrastructure and port and power. So this is a project that we've built for 17 years, 15 years since we listed, over 12 years of permitting advance to be sitting with an EIA ready to submit this year, and a project looking to come into production in 2030. Now that, again, may sound like a long time frame. We're the second closest to production for a plus 100,000 tonne project coming that's outside of the majors, and that's meaningful given where we are in the cycle and what's occurring to the economics on a daily basis as copper and gold prices rise. So this has been a methodically put together project on de-risking, and it enjoys a very low risk profile because of location, infrastructure advantage, and all of the key metrics which you're about to see. What is really exciting, and I might just actually go back and pause here on our land holding. The projects to the north in red, they were our first two discoveries. One when we listed in 2010 called Productora, that is the site of where central processing will be for around a 20 million tonne per annum sulphide operation, supported by a 4 million tonne leaching operation. And that's supported by a second major discovery in Cortadera, which was made almost 10 years later, which supersized this project to its current 1 billion tonne resource base, $250 million invested, 85% measured and indicated, and now just at the right time, we're now ushering in a third major discovery following 7 years of consolidation efforts to the south 30 kilometres on a project called Verde. And this really is a growth engine at the right time with copper and gold winds behind our back that is driving share price. So we're just going to pause on what this footprint looks like. Again, this was a Hud Bay project that we spent many years trying to joint venture in, eventually ended up tying up their land and then securing the private lease within the centre of this project that they could not secure. So this is unified under our ownership for the first time. It was a project we really liked, and on the second hole, we made a major discovery. It's now 1 kilometre long. It's 700 metres wide. It's open in all directions. 10,000 metres of RC drilling was pushing in some very, very exciting results. But what's exciting is how fast this project is growing. So last year, with our first discovery hole and 10,000 metres of RC drilling, we were uncovering something pretty special, grade extending from surface to the depth extent of our RC drilling. And we now fast forward to the commencement of phase 2 drilling, 4 diamond holes only, and we've almost doubled the size of this. We have a high-grade core converging. It's 600 metres long, it's 400 metres wide, and this thing is putting out some serious widths on around close to 1% copper equivalent grades, 0.6% copper, 0.3 grams per tonne gold, over 150 metre widths. These results just went into the market about 6 days ago, and we'll now be seeing a lot of diamond holes starting to put results into the market on the up-dip components. What this looks like to the company is something that's very transformational, not just to our resource base, but providing a potential high-grade starter pit for the economics of a pre-feasibility, which only came out 9 months ago. So this is really exciting the market. And this is just a cross-section showing some of the holes that are about to be released in the coming week on some of the up-dip holes, which are outlining what looks like a close to 1% copper equivalent high-grade starter pit for the operation that will be simply just trucked up the road. We like the scale of this. There are 3 lookalike targets around it. We haven't got to them yet. They will be drilled. A lot of them are undercover. And the yellow area there is what you see as the first discovery, and the pink area is probably the next one off the rank. So this is a large system that looks like it's going to take our combined resource base, already in the top 10 undeveloped copper projects of the world, not controlled by a major, and probably take that well into tier 1 asset categorisation, plus 5 million tonnes of contained copper. So at the moment, this is very substantial for what Hot Chili is holding as an advanced asset and where that will go. The grade of these assets in the pipeline, get used to it. This is where copper production head grade for the world is in a 28 million tonne production market, which is heading towards 40 million tonnes of demand quite quickly over the coming 10 years. And that I guess, lack of supply is really what is driving copper now almost alongside iron ore as the most valuable metal market in the world, and being challenged, might I add, by gold coming up behind it. So we're seeing a real shift towards the world starting to focus, and all of the major companies in the world, including BHP and Rio Tinto, the Anglo-Teck mega merger, the Rio Glencore tie-up, one of our largest shareholders in Glencore, really starting to focus on where can they get their hands on meaningful sized projects that have these kind of metrics. So this is our pre-feasibility. It came out about 9 months ago, nearly 120,000 tonnes of fine copper equivalent metal production, carried mostly by copper, around 95,000 tonnes per annum. But what we outlined was a very low-risk project, bottom quartile capital intensity. That's really important. So this is a very cheap project at $1.3 billion US to build. Now that might sound quite funny to some, but projects that can put out that kind of metal for that kind of capital, there aren't very many in the world. And what that means is that we have metrics on post-tax NPVs and IRRs that change quite dramatically to copper price. And they, I guess, leverage very significantly. So we're already probably one of the 4th most leveraged significant copper developers in the world to copper price. Every 10 cents a pound on that pre-feasibility added US $100 million of NPV to our bottom line on profit. And what the leverage factor will be after the addition of Verde to our resource base, probably a very significant jump on that leverage to our mine plan of over 50%, and probably establishing Hot Chili as the boat that will rise fastest in a rising copper market. So this is another diagram. This is the importance of elevation. When you don't sit at 4,000 metres elevation, when you don't have to sit down after walking 30 metres, you also enjoy very low capital costs, very low operating costs. Being down on the coastline is a huge advantage for the buildability of large-scale copper projects. We have a very compact development footprint, but what we really have as a secret X factor within this company is the foresight to apply for water license over 13 years ago, when at that time you could take water out of the ground to produce copper in the Atacama and to develop new mines. That changed about 7 years ago. The regulators in Chile changed the regulations so that you could not take continental water out of the ground for the mining sector in the Atacama, one of the most significant metal areas of the world, particularly for copper. And so back then, when we received our first metallurgy results and realised we could process our ore bodies with better recovery using just seawater, we applied for a maritime concession. Many people laughed at us. Not many knew even how long it would take to get a maritime concession. No one had applied for one in so many decades in Chile. We're now one of only 2 companies in 22 years to have received one. And what that means is we start to look at what the strategic value of that water asset is. We also released a pre-feasibility on what a seawater supply would look like to Costa Fuego, but also what the potential was to supply water to those many large undeveloped projects which now are stranded and challenged with no water access. Over 10 years to secure our maritime concession. And so we have access to seawater for our project that you can see there, 50 kilometres in from port, but we potentially have an entire region of off-takers to supply in the Huasco Valley, and a potential large-scale water asset that looks to be multi-decade and able to unlock the timeframes to development for those major copper projects all around us, which don't have water access and require desalinated water. So in the second quarter of this year, as Brian said, this is a water project within an advanced copper developer that the market is struggling to understand value on, even with pre-feasibility numbers sporting billion-dollar NPVs. This is something that catalyses very quickly when Hot Chili receives its second maritime licence approval. We expect to see that around the second quarter of this year. We have NDAs with every major company that you're looking at. We also have NDAs with every major international water consortium that is looking to invest in one of the hottest water investment jurisdictions in the world, in Chile, because of these regulatory changes. So I imagine that value will catalyse very quickly on this asset in Q2 both with offtake and potential strategic partners. So to summarise, we have a very meaningful near-term large copper development. There are very few at this scale in the world, which provides very few opportunities to have maximum exposure and leverage to copper price. Having around 10% of our revenue in gold and seeing what gold is doing, we also have a huge amount of leverage with 50,000 ounces of gold production coming out of this project. But location, elevation, strategic water assets to combat things that shareholders really should care about, which is dilution per share. All of these things are combining at the right time to drive Hot Chili's share price to a re-rate, which has already begun. So thank you very much for your time.